Hey, welcome back. We are almost done. We have 3 chapters left. We're not finished that in this video. Um, so we met Socks, we met the Brickers, we met Charles Williams. An interesting little family. Socks was getting fat because they kept feeding him the baby's formula. So they all decided to go on diets. And how did Socks feel about that one? Most people, unless they choose to go on a diet, don't want to go on a diet. He what else? Met the rest of their family, their Uncle Walter, Cassie, and Aunt Cassie, and Mike. Did not like them. And we met Miss Risley, the babysitter. We did like her. We know Socks likes to bake for food, and he will bake to anybody that'll give it to him. And Charles Williams is getting a little bit older, so maybe he'll become a little bit better for Socks, but who knows? We'll find out, right? We're going to finish the book. So here we go. Chapter 5. A visit from Nana. If you don't know what a Nana is, that's pretty much grandma. Grandmother. A puzzling and, to Socks, inconvenient change took place in the behavior of his mistress. Miss Bicker, who usually spent the least possible time housekeeping, now upset the household by thorough cleaning. Socks had to rewash his paws after he walked across the kitchen floor, wet from the mop. The vacuum cleaner drove him from one room to another, and the smell of ammonia that Miss Bicker used to wash the windows drove him out of the house. The only good that came from all this house cleaning was the disappearance of dust from under the bed. Socks could now retreat in safety without sneezing. Cooking came next. Miss Bricker dumped Socks out of the back door so he would not be underfoot. He watched from the windowsill while she made a molded salad, experimented with cake mixes, and tried meatloaf recipes. Not long afterwards, Miss Bricker, carrying luggage, walked into the house with a thin, brisk woman, whom he called Mom, but referred to as Nana. Mr. Bricker's mother had arrived to spend her 2-week vacation visiting her son and his family. Socks could tell right away that Nana was no Miss Risley. He sniffed her luggage for a clue to the contents and then turned his back on all the greetings and washed himself. Exclamations of Nana's precious is a big boy. Yes, he is, and he looks just like his father when he was the same age. Bored Socks. Nana, unlike Miss Risley, did not understand the importance of a cat. After Mr. Bricker's mother had admired her grandson, giving the family presents, and been taken on a tour of the house, she said, "Bill, I didn't know you kept a cat." Socks sensed all eyes were on him and looked up from his washing. He saw that Charles Williams was sitting on his mother's lap, staring at his grandmother's shining hair, which was the color of iced tea. "Oh, good old Socks. He's quite a character," said Mr. Bricker. Then, to change the subject, he remarked, "What have you done to your hair? It looks different." "That is between me and my hairdresser." Nana smiled and changed the subject back again. "Are you sure it's a good idea keeping a cat when there's a baby in the house?" Miss Bricker was quick to defend their pet. "Socks is a clean, healthy cat, and we love him. He is a member of our family." Socks delicately washed the pink pads of his right front paw. Nana was not convinced. "Some babies are allergic to cats." "Not our boy," said Mrs. Bricker. "Charles William hasn't shown any signs of allergy." She took hold of her son's big toe and said, "He's a big, healthy boy." "Yes, he is." Charles William, who was drooling because he was teething, looked pleased. "This little piggy went to market," Miss Bricker wiggling one rosy toe. "Gig," said Charles Williams. "But aren't you afraid the cat might scratch the baby?" persisted Nana, her glance resting on the frayed corner of the loopy chair where Socks sharpened his claws. "Not really," said Miss Bricker. "I do keep an eye on him and when they're in the same room, but he's very patient with Tiffy, the little girl next door. When she picks him up around the middle, he doesn't even struggle. He just goes limp until she puts him down, and then he runs away." "Can't be too careful around a baby." Nana was not persuaded that Socks should remain a member of her son's family. Socks soon found the grandmother's visit a trial. Everything he did was wrong. When he tried to jump on her lap, his claws snagged her knit dress, and he was scolded. Her nylon stockings dancing over the heat as they dried in the bathroom were irresistible to him, and he could not understand why she felt he had misbehaved when he pulled them down and played with them. Couldn't she understand that a cat needed to play? When Nana settled on the couch to knit for a sweater for her grandson, Socks was so fascinated by the movement of her knitting needles that she had to jump up beside her watch. She eyed him with disapproval, but when he sat very, very still, the way he sat while watching the bug crawl across the floor, she did not object. He did not take his eyes from those flashing needles until, with one quick swipe of his paw, he reached out and hooked the head of the knitting needle in his claws. The needle slid out of the yarn and flipped to the coffee table with a clatter. "Now you see what you made me do," said Nana crossly. "I just dropped 94 stitches." Miss Reasley would not have spoken to Socks in this tone. "Isn't it funny the way cats are always attracted to people who don't like them?" said Miss Bricker. Socks' feelings were hurt when she picked him up and set him down outside the front door. As the days passed, Nana grew more critical of Socks. If he scratched, she was sure he was crawling with fleas that might bite Charles Williams. Every time Socks watched and waited until he could get his paws on Brown Bear, she took it away from him and brushed it off. If her grandson sneezed, she was sure he was allergic to cats. She was constantly brushing cat hair off of the couch, and one evening she plucked a cat hair out of her salad. She was polite, though, and did not call attention to it, but the Brickers noticed. Nights were the hardest of all. Because the Brickers' house was small, Nana had to sleep on the couch in the living room while Socks, who considered the couch his bed, was shut in the laundry. Socks resented this arrangement. Every evening he complained himself hoarse, even though Mr. Bricker interrupted the conversation in the living room to shout, "Socks, be quiet!" Socks lay yowling on the hard floor and groped under the door with his paw. He sat up and threw his shoulder against the door. When absolutely nothing would free him, his last act before settling down on the sweatshirt was to plow kitty litter over the floor so someone would have to sweep it up in the morning. Socks became so discouraged that each night he yowled less and sulked more, until one moonlit night, when the household had settled into silence, the laundry was so light that Socks was restless. He jumped out of his box, extended his paw as if he were bowing, enjoyed a good stretch, and then threw his shoulder against the door, which this time surprised him by silently opening enough for a cat to walk through. Socks was free. He padded through the kitchen and the dining room to the living room where Nana was asleep. The pupils of her eyes widened in the dim light, and as he was about to spring, the pupils of his eyes widened in the dim light, and as he was about to spring on the blanket beside her, he noticed her suitcase lying open in the corner of the room. Nana had not understood his curiosity about her luggage, and he had not allowed him to look inside. Socks trotted across the carpet, and after a cautious sniff, stepped into the suitcase. A nylon slip felt smooth to his paw pads and made softer than the old sweatshirt. Socks was about to use the suitcase for a bed when a ghostly object looming on the desk caught his attention. He stood motionless, staring up at something white gleaming in the darkness, and when it did not move, he could not smell it. He sprang to the top of the desk to investigate. There he discovered an astonishing thing. Nana's hair. There, in the midst of Miss Bicker's books and papers, sat the hair on a faceless white head. He had never seen such a sight in his life. His head cocked to one side, Socks padded to the soft fibers with a curious paw. He was fascinated. He patted with his other paw. He was there, something to play with. Here was something to play with, and Socks was lonely for play. With extended claws, Socks hooked the hair from the styrofoam head and batted it over the edge of the desk to the floor. The head rolled over the edge of the desk, too, and then landed beside the hair with a soft thump, which made Nana stir in her sleep. Socks sprang on the hair, caught it in his paws, tossed it into the air, and felt it fall on the carpet. Then he pounced. He hugged the soft bundle of fibers with his front paws and kicked it with his strong hind feet. He rolled over with the hair still clutched to his body. With his movement muffled by the carpet, he tussled and scuffled and wrestled. He dropped the hair hid behind a chair and pounced again. He pretended to ignore it before he surprised it by catching it in his claws and tossing it into the air. Finally, Socks grew bored with the game. Nana's hair would not fight back. He dropped in a patch of moonlight and settled in for the night on the nylons and lace in Nana's suitcase. The next morning, Socks was awakened by Nana groping for her bedroom slippers. The hair on her head, her second best hair, was shorter and grayer than the hair on the carpet. Socks yawned so hard that his ears lay back and his pink tongue stretched out of his mouth. He eased his muscles by humping his back like a Halloween cat and leapt into the carpet, where he proceeded with his morning wash. "Well," said Nana in a whisper, "just what do you think you're doing in here?" Socks did not care for the tone of her voice. He paused long enough to give her an insolent look, as if to say, "I belong here, you do not," before he continued licking his fur. Soon he turned his head away from Nana to reach the difficult spot behind his shoulders. Nana, who had not rested well on the lumpy couch, was buttoning her robe when she noticed the naked styrofoam head on the floor. She was quick to discover her best hair on the carpet. With an angry "Oh!" she snatched it up and stared at it while Socks pretended to ignore her. The Brickers were awake. Water ran in the bathroom and Mr. Bricker's electric razor buzzed. You cat," Nana whispered, look what you've done." Socks looked, but not for long. Grooming his immaculate white paws was more important. He found a bit of dried mud between his toes, which needed attention. Nana examined the netting inside the wig, and in the desk drawer she found some Scotch tape, which she used for some hasty repairs. Then she set what had once been her best hair on the styrofoam head and went to work with her hairbrush. She smoothed and brushed, and she patted and poked. She pinched waves into the place and rolled the ends all over her fingers. When she was unsure the bathroom was free, she picked up her hair and her clothes and stalked from the living room. Charles Williams began to fuss. Socks was waiting by the refrigerator when Mr. Bickers arrived to warm a bottle. "Out of the way, Socks," said Mrs. Bickers, giving him a gentle shove with her foot so she could open the refrigerator door. Socks meowed and rubbed against her ankles while she set a bottle and a pan of water on the stove. Mr. Bricker appeared with Charles Williams, still dressed in a sleeper, in his arms. "Mommy is getting her baby's breakfast just as fast as she can," said Mrs. Bricker in the voice that Socks resented when it was not addressed to him. Nana joined the family in the kitchen. The sight of her hair silenced her daughter-in-law and made her son stare. Odd little tufts poked out from the once smooth curls. The silence, broken by the quivery sobs of the hungry baby, was awkward. "Mom, what happened to your hair?" asked her son. He did not approve of his mother wearing a wig. The Bickers thought hair should look natural. "Nothing," said Nana bravely. "It was nothing, really. Nothing a trip to the hairdresser won't repair." Mr. Bricker was not satisfied. "Something must have happened to make your hair look like a bird's nest." "Bill," Mrs. Bricker's voice held a warning, as Socks purred and rubbed against her legs. He was every bit as hungry as Charles Williams, but he was much pleasanter. Nana frowned at Socks in spite of all his charm. "Socks," said Mrs. Bricker accusingly, "did you get into Nana's hair?" Attention at last. Socks stood on his hind legs with his front paws braced against Mrs. Bricker and increased the volume of his purr. "Oh, you bad cat." Mrs. Bricker unhooked his claws from her housecoat. Charles William drooled and wept. The water on the stove began to bubble and to splash over the edge of the pan, hissing as it hit the burner. "Now see what you made me do. The bottle is too hot and it takes forever to cool." She removed the pan from the stove and replaced the boiling water with cold water. Socks did not care for the treatment that he was getting. These people are wasting too much time. They neither feed him nor attend to the baby. "Nana, I'm terribly sorry," said Mrs. Bicker. "I was sure Socks was shutting the laundry. I guess we didn't give the door the extra shove. If you don't give it that..." "Now, Marilyn, don't worry about a thing," said Nana, determined not to cause trouble. "I'll have my wig washed and set at a beauty shop. Everything will be all right. Now, what can I do to help?" "In a minute you can give Charles Williams his cereal." Miss Bricker tripped over Socks on her way to the cupboard for a custard cup. "Everything is so hectic because we forgot to set the alarm." Socks had endured too much delay from these chattering people. Charm had not worked. His patience was at an end. He nipped at Mrs. Bricker's ankle and reminded her that he wanted his breakfast, and he wanted it now. 2 tiny drops of blood appeared on her bare leg. "Marilyn, that cat bit you!" Nana was shocked. "You're bleeding." "Socks!" Mr. Bricker shouted in such a terrible voice that Socks was stunned. Never had his master spoken to him that way. He cringed against the cupboard and looked up at Mr. Bricker with wide, frightened eyes. A fussy, teething baby, and a husband in a hurry to leave for his classes and his job in the university library, the strain of a mother-in-law in a house too small for guests, papers waiting to be typed, and a nipping cat were all too much for Mrs. Bricker. "Bill, get the cat out of here," she said with tears in her voice. "Please, get the cat out of here before I go out of my mind." To his astonishment, Socks, who had not meant to hurt Mrs. Bricker, found himself lifted and dumped out the back door without so much as a kind word or a bite of breakfast. He stood lashing his tail in anger in a few minutes when he began to understand that no one was going to let him in. He jumped to the sill of the dining room window where he could see Nana holding Charles William and spooning cereal into his mouth. Miss Bricker, with a band-aid on her ankle, was dropping bread into a toaster, and Mr. Bricker was pouring cereal from a box. Socks meowed peevishly to let his owners know he was cross, hungry, and unfairly treated. "Beat it, you cat," said Mr. Bricker, as we reached for a carton of half and half. "Can't have a cat that bites in this house." "Oh, doy doy," shouted Charles Williams, happy to be eating breakfast at last and secure in love of his family. All right, that's the end of that chapter. So Socks is just annoyed, but Nana's even more annoying if you think about it. She does not like cats, and she doesn't like Socks. So they locked him up every night in the laundry room. So he got out. What did he do when he got out? Well, Nana actually doesn't have much hair and is gray, and she doesn't like that because she owns a wig. And Socks found the wig and kind of treated it like it was his enemy, and he fought it. And he won because the wig didn't fight back. And after that, he slept in her suitcase. So when she got up the next morning, she wasn't happy. I mean, the whole family got up late because of an alarm, but they weren't feeding Socks, and he was getting mad. So what did he do to show that he was getting mad about not being fed? Yep, he bit Mrs. Bricker on the ankle, and that made everybody mad, and she was overstressed, so she told her husband to get him out before she loses her mind. He threw him to the backyard, and when they realized he was mad, he got on the windowsill doing his crying and stuff, and they told him we can't have a cat that bites in this house. And that's where we ended. So, chapter 6. Old Taylor. "Don't you like Socks anymore?" Tiffy asked Mr. Bricker, who was trying to spade a section of the backyard while Socks rolled in the dirt at his feet. The Brickers planned to make a vegetable garden so Charles Williams could have nice fresh vegetables to eat. "Sure we like him, Tiffy," said Mr. Bricker. "Then how come he sleeps in the garage?" persisted Tiffy. "We can't have a cat that bites in the house with a baby," Mr. Bricker exclaimed. "He doesn't bite me. He could sleep at my home if you wanted." Tiffy looked wistfully at Socks squirming in the dirt. He would have to spend the rest of the afternoon grooming himself, a small price to pay for a good roll that satisfied all the places he wanted, scratched and made his skin tingle. He missed the sort of brushing Miss Breesley had given him, but the sitter never came again. The young couple could not afford her. Tiffy squatted beside Socks. "Do you want to come and live at my house?" she asked. Socks, who had finished rolling in the dirt, sat up and, after considering Tiffy a moment, allowed her to pet him. Since he had become an outdoor cat, he was grateful for any attention from anyone, even Tiffy, and the two had formed a cautious friendship. "See," said Tiffy to Mr. Bricker, "Socks likes me. He wants to live at my house." She made the mistake of patting his head, and Socks moved away. Petting and patting were not the same, and he was disappointed in her. "A cat's heart is where his dish is," said Mr. Bricker. Mr. Bricker was wrong. Socks' dish and water bowl had been moved to the back step, and his bed had been moved to the garage, where a window was left open so he could come and go. Still, his heart remained in the house with his family. Loneliness and curiosity drove Socks to spend more and more time sitting on the windowsill watching all that went on inside. He watched Mr. Bricker's shadow box in front of the playpen. He listened to Charles Williams laugh. He watched Charles Williams grab Brown Bear by one leg and beat it against the playpen pad. He heard him shout, "I did." He was curious for a closer look at the plastic ball filled with water and sloshing plastic fish. He saw Charles Williams support himself on his hands and knees and crawl across the pen. He watched him grab the bars and gently unsteadily to his feet. See the kitty, said Mr. Bricker many times a day as she looked up from her typewriter. "The kitty's looking at you." Charles Williams paused in throwing his toys outside his playpen or pounding on a pie tin to stare at Socks. Sometimes he'd watch Socks without his mother telling him to. Loneliness was not the only trouble in Socks' life. Jays scattered his dry food and swooped at him whenever they came to steal. He felt threatened on Tuesday mornings when the garbage men came, and he was afraid of the milkman. But his biggest worry was old Taylor, the black cat with the torn ear and bulging jowls, who lived across the back fence and belonged to the family named Taylor. Although the fence was the property of the house rented by the Bickers, it should have been part of Socks's territory. Old Taylor made it his own by sleeping on it whenever the sun was out. This habit annoyed Socks, who sometimes wanted to sit on the fence out of Tiffy's reach when he grew bored with her attention. However, the two cats had come to an understanding. Old Taylor would beat up Socks if Socks tried to sit on the fence while Old Taylor was using it. One morning, Socks, who had fallen asleep on the warm hood of this old station wagon, was awakened by the sound of a late spring rain driving against the garage. The car hood had grown cold and hard, and after a stretch and a brief wash, Socks sprang to the windowsill, where he saw the neighborhood was still dark. There was no hope of breakfast, but he might find dry food left in his dish from the night before. The grass was cold, wet in his paws as he ran through the downpour in the direction of the back step. In the dim light, Socks saw a sinister black shape crouched at his dish in the dry spot below the eaves. Old Taylor. Through the sound of the rainwater gurgling in the drainpipe, Socks heard the crunch of the teeth crushing dry cat food. The intrusion would not do at all. Old Taylor had his side of the fence. Socks had his. Socks would not quibble about the fence itself, but his food was a different matter. He crouched, flattened his ears, and hissed, hoping to frighten the other cat, but prepared to defend his dish if he must. Old Taylor merely glanced in his direction and went on gnashing and crunching. Socks' honor as a cat could not excuse such rudeness. He advanced, still hissing through the rain. Old Taylor stopped gnawing and grinding. He flattened his ears and hissed back from the dry spot on the steps. By now, Socks was not only angry, he was soaking wet. He ignored the rain and continued to crouch, changing his hiss to a light sing-song wail, intended to warn Old Taylor that he meant what he said. His tune did not frighten Old Taylor. The black cat returned to sound louder and meaner. No young upstart was going to tell him anything. The fur of the two cats rose along their spines. They wailed and howled and caterwauled, and all during the eerie duet they were moving closer to one another with their fangs bared and their ears laid back. Nose to nose, Socks found Old Taylor a terrifying sight, with his ear torn and his fur standing out in the great black jowls. But Socks did not back down. Finally, a terrible scream. The cats were on one another, growling and snarling and yowling in tangle. They clawed and bit and tumbled down the steps into the puddle. They rolled across the soaking grass into freshly spaded earth. They floundered and wallowed in the mud. Old Taylor was on his back, thrashing at Socks with punishing blows of his strong hind feet. Socks felt claws and teeth through his fur. He hurt, he was bleeding, and Old Taylor had sprayed him. The black cat was too much for him. Socks no longer cared about his dry food. Let the old tomcat have it. Socks wanted to get away, so to untangle himself from the snarling, biting mass of muddy black fur. Somehow he did get away and ran for the garage while Old Taylor sent sing-song warnings after him through the downpour. When Socks tried to leap to the windowsill, the weight of the mud on his fur made him fall. When he tried to lick his bleeding forepaw, the rasp of his tongue scraped up a mouthful of mud. Cold, wet, stiff with mud and in pain, Socks needed help. Lights were coming on in the bedrooms and bathroom and kitchens of all the neighborhood. Old Taylor had disappeared. Slowly and painfully made his way through the rain, through the scattered cat food, now soggy and unappetizing, to his own back door, where he cried a small, desperate meow for help. Miss Bricker, who was in the kitchen, heard and must have understood, for she immediately opened the back door. "Socks!" she cried, shocked. Socks looked up at her with sad, defeated eyes. "Oh, poor Socks!" Miss Bricker opened the door wider, and Socks stepped painfully into the laundry. "Bill, come and look at Socks. He's been in a fight." Mr. Bricker came down the hall with his bathrobe flying. "Why, you poor old fellow," he said when he saw his cat. Socks waited helplessly. "And he's bleeding," cried Mrs. Bricker. "What will we do? He can't lick all that mud." Mr. Bricker agreed, and if we tried to give him a bath, he'd climb the wall. "We can't let the mud dry," said Mrs. Bricker. "Adobe bricks are made out of mud like this. If it dries, he'll turn into an adobe cat." "Try wet bath towels." Mr. Bricker snatched a clean towel from the tangle on top of the dryer and dampened it under the kitchen faucet. Miss Bricker did the same, and they knelt and began to rub Socks. How good the warm towels and gentle hands felt. Charles William awoke and fussed in his crib, but this time Socks got the attention, which made him feel better. "Poor Socks," screamed Mrs. Bricker as he swabbed with a second towel and then a third. "It's all our fault for shutting you out." She dropped the towel onto the washing machine and reached for a clean diaper. Socks should learn to roll over on his back and kick with the hind legs when he gets into a fight, said Mr. Bricker, who is interested in all sports. His strength is in his hind legs. He should hang on with front paws and give old Taylor everything he's got with his hind legs. Bill, you can't coach a cat. Miss Bricker laughed affectionately as she held another diaper under the kitchen's faucet. Charles Williams' increased volume of his fussing began to rock his crib. Socks needs us, his mother called to him. You'll have to wait. Then she said to her husband, Bill, can't we let Socks live in the house again? I know he didn't mean to bite so hard that time. I always watch him when he's in the room with Charles Williams. I don't see why not, said Mr. Bricker, scrubbing the matted fur with a clean diaper. He's older and wiser now, and you still have to keep an eye on him. Charles Williams began to bump his crib against the wall. I'm coming, Mrs. Bricker raised her hands in the kitchen without bothering to change him, carried Charles Williams to his high chair, which she turned so that he could watch from the kitchen. She handed him a spoon to bang and went back to swabbing Socks. Charles Williams enthusiastically whacked the spoon on the tray of his high chair until Socks caught his interest. He stopped whacking to stare, and he had never seen a mud-covered cat before, and had to give the matter some thought. Ticky, he said at last. Ticky. Socks understood that Charles Williams was talking to him, and beneath his misery he felt the beginning of a new interest in the baby. Both parents stopped scrubbing the cat to look at their son and then at one another. Did you hear that? Cried the mother. He's talking. He's trying to say kitty. Smart boy, said the proud father. Socks was forgotten. Charles Williams had spoken a word, well, almost. Ticky. Imagine that. Charles Williams had called Socks Ticky. There, his mother would write his first word in his baby book. His father would write the news to Nana, maybe even phone collect. Charles Williams, overwhelmed with his own cleverness, heaved the spoon across the kitchen. Then the Bickers noticed the clock. If they did not hurry, Mr. Bricker would be late for class. He rushed off to dress, while Mrs. Bricker dashed to the kitchen, trying to prepare one breakfast for the parent and another for the baby. Ticky, said Charles Williams, pleased with himself and eager to rekindle the excitement that he had caused. That's right, answered his proud mother. We can't forget Ticky. She returned to the laundry, where Socks was licking his wounds, and offered him a piece of meat with her fingers. He was sorry they had no appetite. Mrs. Bricker turned on the clothes dryer to warm the laundry and closed the door. This time Socks did not object being shut in. He crouched on the aching joints, and allowing for the weight of the mud on his furs, leaped to the top of the dryer, where he settled himself to licking his bleeding leg in a tangle of clean diapers waiting to be folded. In the kitchen, Charles Williams demanded adoration. Ticky, he said, slapping his palm on the tray of the high chair. Ticky, kitty, said Mrs. Bricker. Ticky, said Charles Williams, and laughed. He had invented a game. Socks was soothed by the hum of the dryer and by the heat rising through the diapers. His throat began to vibrate with a hoarse and rusty-sounding purr, as if he had not purred for a long time. Kitty, Ticky, Mrs. Bricker, and the baby were talking about him. All right, so that's the end of that chapter. So we found out the name of the black cat in the backyard was Old Taylor. What was Old Taylor doing that made Socks mad? He was sitting on his back porch eating his food, and that just couldn't do. So they fought. Did Socks win? Oh, God, no. Socks got beat up. And he was laying on the porch crying because he couldn't clean himself. There was too much mud. He was bleeding. And Miss Bricker found him, and brought him inside. And they paid so much attention to him that he was kind of like happy again. But what changed their paying attention to him? Charles Williams, he said Ticky, which they take as being kitty. And they were very excited because when a baby has their first word, that's a big deal. But he didn't care. Socks did not care. He was like, I'm too beat up and tired. So he went and laid down while they kept talking to Charles Williams. So this is the last chapter. Chapter 7, Socks and Charles Williams. Socks soon discovered, once his bed and dish had been returned to their old place in the laundry, that being inside the house with Charles Williams was quite different from watching him through the window. Charles Williams had outgrown his morning nap, and whenever Socks was in the room, he no longer was content to stay in his pen playing with Brown Bear or with his plastic ball filled with sloshing plastic fish. The minute his mother set him down inside the pen, he began to fuss. If his mother ignored his fussing, he clung to the bars and howled. His playpen bored him. He wanted out. If the cat was out, he should be out too. All this howl and shaking of the wooden bars worried Socks, who sat beside the playpen like the Sphinx, with his paws flat in front of him, staring at the only human being he knew who was anywhere near his own size. The louder Charles William cried, the more uneasy Socks became, until finally he ran meowing to Mrs. Bricker to tell her that she must do something to stop the crying. Miss Bricker always relented. "All right, you two," she said as she lifted her son out of the pen and set him on the carpet. "You win." She was careful never to have Socks and a baby alone with Charles when Charles Williams was outside the playpen. Charles Williams was into everything. He tried to chew the lamp cord until his mother came running to pry it out of his fingers and unplug the lamp. He crawled into the laundry and threw Socks' dry food all over the floor. Miss Bricker started serving Socks meals on top of the clothes dryer. Charles William pulled magazines off the coffee table with a slam that woke Socks with a start. He cried when his mother would not let him taste the dead moth that he found. He sat in his high chair yelling "oo doy doy" into his cup because he could make more noise that way. He stuffed his mouth with cottage cheese and blew it all over the kitchen for his mother to wipe up. He pulled pans out of the cupboards and banged them on the floor, a sound most disturbing to a cat's sensitive ears. When given an educational toy, 3 wooden rings to fit on a peg, he threw away the rings and grabbed the peg as if it were a tomahawk and pounded the floor with its base. Most of all, Charles William delighted in crawling after Socks. "Ticky," he said hopefully, "Ticky." Socks came to accept his new name from the baby. Let the Brickers call him Ticky, and all they earned was a look of contempt. "Pet the kitty gently," said Mrs. Bricker when Charles William reached for Socks' tail. Socks learned to put up with Charles Williams and, when necessary, to escape under the dining room table, where he was fenced in by chair legs. "See, the kitty's tired," said Mrs. Bricker to Charles Williams when Socks had fled to safety. Actually, Miss Williams was the one who was tired. Charles William was not the only active baby. He was growing heavier, and lifting him in and out of the high chair or onto the table in his room where his diapers were changed was tiring his mother. In the afternoon, after she put Charles Williams down in his crib with his bottle and brown bear for his nap, Mrs. Bricker kicked off her sandals and fell asleep on the couch in the living room. There was nothing Socks enjoyed so much as a warm body to lean against while he washed, but as soon as he settled himself against Miss Bricker, was grooming himself with the long, hard licks, pausing to chew the rough spots, she pushed him onto the floor. "Socks, please," she said. "Be a good cat." In a moment, Socks was back against this exhausted mother, licking and chewing, and occasionally scratching until his fur was sleek and his paws snowy. Miss Bricker, who knew she was defeated, was too tired to protest, slept, and after a few minutes of vibrant purring, so did Socks. One afternoon, when Mrs. Bricker had put Charles Williams in his crib for his nap, Jocks jumped down from the top of the clothes dryer where he had been crunching his dry food. He was passing the baby's room on his way to join Mrs. Bricker on the couch as Charles Williams heaved his bottle out of the crib. The top, which he had managed to twist off, came off, and a sight of all the milk spilling across the floor caught Socks' attention. Socks went to investigate, and although the milk was ordinary milk instead of formula he had once enjoyed, he crouched and leapt while Charles Williams watched. When Socks had finished and was tidying his whiskers, Charles Williams got on his hands and knees and began to rock his crib as if he wanted to show what he could do. The crib began to move. Charles Williams rocked harder. The crib slid across the bare floor to the door, which Charles Williams was able to reach out to and push shut. An accomplishment that pleased him. He rocked some more past the door until the crib touched the wall and barred the door. Socks looked up at Charles Williams and meowed. How was he going to get out with the door shut? Charles Williams was delighted to have the cat speak to him personally. This was something new. Socks meowed again. He did not want to be shut in the bedroom when he was supposed to be napping in the living room. Charles Williams wanted to amuse the cat. He worked at the crack in his plastic-covered crib bumper and tearing at it until he pulled out the tuft of cotton, which he threw out between the bars of his crib. With alert eyes, Socks watched the fluff floating towards the floor. A second fluff followed, and a third. Socks leapt to clap it between his paws as if it were a butterfly. The baby chortled and tossed out a bigger piece of the cotton. Socks leapt from that one to and dropped it and battered across the floor. Now the crack in the plastic was big enough so that Charles Williams could get both hands into it, and he pulled out gobs after gobs of cotton for the cat's amusement. Socks leapt and pounced and raced in a wild ballet, skidding through what was left of the milk, rolling over with cotton in his paws, while Charles Williams laughed and pulled out more cotton. Socks leapt for that too, pleased to play with the fluffy stuff pleased to entertain an admiring audience. Faster and faster, Socks raced and leapt. Charles Williams screamed with laughter. Socks heard the padding sound of Mrs. Bricker hurrying down the hall in her bare feet, but he paid no attention. Charles Williams was silent when he heard the doorknob turn, and Socks paused to pant. Mrs. Bricker tried to open the door, but she could not because of the crib wedged in the corner. "Oh!" she cried and rattled the door. "Charles Williams, are you all right?" she asked as if she expected him to answer. Then after a pause she added, "Socks, are you in there?" Charles Williams' attention returned to the torn crib bumpers. On with the game. Handfuls of cotton snowed down from the cribs for Socks. Charles Williams laughed harder than he ever laughed in all his 10 months. The door rattled again. "Charles Williams, what are you doing?" Mrs. Bricker's voice was frightened. His mother could not get in. Charles Williams found this development so funny that he laughed even harder. He stuck out his tongue and blew and found his new noise hilarious. "What am I going to do?" Mrs. Bricker asked herself and ran down the hall on her bare feet. In a moment, Socks heard her running out the back door. In another moment, he saw her anxious face above the windowsill. Charles Williams pulled out his last handful of cotton and threw it to Socks. His mother was outside, and he and the cat were inside. Charles Williams thought this situation was a huge joke. Socks was tired of chasing cotton. He lay on his side, panting, while Miss Bricker pushed at the window. Charles Williams did not want the fun to end, and he was willing to sacrifice Brown Bear by throwing him over the crib railing. Socks got to his feet and waggled his rump and sprang on the bear. "Socks!" shouted Mrs. Bricker through the closed window. "You stop that!" No matter how hard she pounded on the frame, she still could not budge the window, which was too high for her. Socks saw no need to obey. There was nothing she could do to stop his sparring with Brown Bear. Charles Williams threw his blanket out of the crib and looked around for something else to amuse the cat. His sharp eyes saw a tiny tear in the wallpaper beside the door jamb. He grasped a bit of the paper and pulled. "No, no!" shouted his mother, who had papered that room herself to get it ready for her new baby. Charles Williams, "No, no." Charles Williams blew again. He did not have to mind his mother. He pulled off a long, satisfying shred of blue paper printed with yellow daisies, and all by himself he pulled it off. Nobody helped him. Delighted with his skill and cleverness, he dropped the curl of paper through the bars of his crib, shared with Socks. He laughed so hard that he began to hiccough. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Bricker. "Charles Williams, be a good boy while I run and get a stepladder." Charles Williams sat hiccoughing while Socks sparred a Brown Bear, and then he noticed the light switch beside the door. Still hiccoughing, he pulled himself to his feet and worked at the switch until he found the secret of flipping it. The ceiling light went on. Charles Williams actually turned on the light all by himself. He had flipped the switch by the door, and the light had gone on up there. He had turned on the light just like a grown-up. He turned it off. Miraculous. On. Even more miraculous. Off. On. Off. On. The fun, the laughter, and hiccoughs, and the magic were suddenly too much for the baby. Charles Williams sat down with a thump, lay back with his thumb in his mouth. Gradually, his hiccups subsided. Socks, who had been distracted from Brown Bear by the light, lay panting in the midst of the cotton, only half sorry that the fun had ended. He was pleased that Charles Williams was learning to play. He looked up at the baby, and after a moment of hesitation, leaped lightly to the top of the chest of drawers, and from there into the crib. Charles Williams smiled drowsily around the thumb of his mouth. This had been the best afternoon of his whole life. The most interesting, the most exciting, the most fun. He had found someone to play with. Socks turned around until he found exactly the right spot beside Charles Williams. He lay down on his back, pressed against the back of the baby whose thumb dropped out of his mouth as he fell asleep. Socks licked a paw, rubbed an ear, and let his washing go at that. For the first time since he had slept on Mrs. Risley's lap, he was completely at peace. The crib was comfortable, the room quiet. The rustle of Charles Williams' plastic pants inside his corduroy overalls was friendly and soothing. Socks now had a playmate and a companion. He rested his chin on his outstretched foreleg, but before he could sleep, the stepladder bumping against the house made him raise his head. Socks heard Tiffy say, "Mrs. Bricker, why are you climbing the ladder?" "Because Charles Williams locked me out of his bedroom," answered Mrs. Bricker. "I didn't know he was big enough," said Tiffy. "It's a long story," said Mrs. Bricker. "I'll tell you later." Socks watched Mrs. Bricker raise the window and throw her leg over the Yeah, over the seal. She paused when she saw him so close to her baby. Socks gazed at her with a long, clear look that told her plainly, I have found a friend. This is where I belong. Socks did not take his eyes from Charles Williams' mother. She did not take her eyes from him. As she climbed into the room, she slid the crib away from the door, and they both noticed Tiffy watching through the window. Tiffy, go back, ordered Mrs. Bickers in a loud whisper. You might fall. Lucky Charles William, said Tiffy before she disappeared from the window. Socks returned his gaze to Mrs. Bicker, who picked up Brown Bear and set him in the crib with a smile. She reached over, stroked Socks' fur, giving him permission to stay with Charles Williams. Only then did Socks close his eyes. All right, now that chapter, what happened? Well, Charles Williams is older and he likes to play. So actually you can see it right here in the front of the book. He threw his milk all over. He ripped his bed. He threw cotton everywhere. He moved his crib so it blocked the door, locking his mom out. He threw the cat at his... He didn't throw the cat. He threw his brown bear to the cat. Threw his blanket. He figured out how to turn the lights on and off. He did all that and fell asleep while his mom was trying to get into the room. What did Socks figure out through all that? The kid's not so bad. I mean, he can play with. He's like a companion. He's fun. So he leapt up and got into the crib and laid next to Charles Williams. But he didn't fall asleep yet. He waited until Mrs. Bicker got in and she walked by, noticing, watching, and then she petted him on the fur, and then Socks finally went to sleep. And that's how that story ended. Hope you liked the story. I'd never read it before. I kind of liked it. I'll have another book soon, so until then, have fun.